Welcome to 3D Services assembly instruction video for Finality Gear Drive system made for Lacroix Hypertrucks. My name is Andreas and I will be guiding you through the entire process. To begin, take the hanger adapter. Make sure to apply thread locker on the mating surfaces between the adapter and axle. Even though we are not applying thread locker for this video, you should. Thread locker used for this step is red thread locker. Take the adapter and put it on the hanger. Twist it around until it snaps into the correct orientation. For the next step, take the wheel hub itself and the provided grease. The bearing grease is amber in color. Put grease around the seal. The bearing itself is already packed with grease. Put the wheel hub on the axle and push it against the hanger mount so that the surfaces are snug. In case it doesn't fit on the first try, you should put your hanger into the freezer, and you also should warm up your wheel hub. This will allow the thermal expansion and contraction to give you the space needed for a snug fit. Next, you should take the conical bearing and cover it with grease. Be generous with the grease on all bearing surfaces. Also make sure to put some grease onto the conical surface of the hub itself. Place the bearing onto the axle. Take a brand new lock nut that was included with your kit. The nut is included because the old one might be actually worn by now. Cover the entire axle thread with red thread locker. Finger tighten the axle nut until it can't go no more, and then take a 19mm head socket to finish the tightening properly. Make sure to not over tighten the nut. If you over tighten it, the hub will heat up while riding. If you under tighten the nut, there will be lateral and horizontal movement. This is an example of exactly that. In that case, tighten it a bit more. Initially, the bearings will feel stiff. This is completely normal until they have worn in. If the hub heats up after initial test riding, you will need to loosen the axle nut a little bit. Take the hubcap and put it onto the studs. Take the 5 included torque stand screws and tighten them. Do not over tighten them as they will be held in place by the wheel itself. Take the wheel and put it onto the studs. Take the 5 lug nuts that were included with your kit. Notice that the ends of them are different. You should use the conical side towards the wheel so that they would center the wheels while tightening, just like in a car. Just finger tighten them for now. For the final torque specifications, you should tighten them in a stop button. To achieve optimal torque, imagine the wrench is an hour hand of the clock and you need to go from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock. Do the same for all 5 bolts and you are done with this side. Hopefully, you are doing the same for the other side. If not, feel free to rewind and repeat the steps. Next, we are going to handle the gear drives themselves. The gear drive is attached to the original hanger mounting hose using the original mounting bolts. Place the gear drive onto the hanger. Make sure to use red Loctite for the mounting bolts. After applying red Loctite on the bolts, tighten them while pushing the gear drive towards the hanger. Make sure the gear drive is tightened securely. Now place the conical bearing on the axle, making sure the flat side goes towards the gear drive. Apply grease on the bearing. Be generous with it. Also apply grease to the internal bearing cavity. Use red Loctite on the motor shaft and key. Push the motor shaft with key into the spur gear. Apply red Loctite to the 4 motor bolts and tighten them. Make sure both the internal and external bearing surfaces are greased and put the wheel gear on. At this time you should also pack the other bearing with grease. Cover the entire axle thread with red thread locker. Take a brand new lock nut that was included with your kit. Finger tighten the axle nut until it can't go no more, and then take a 19mm head socket to finish the tightening properly. After fully tightening, the gears will not spin freely, and this is completely normal. You need to loosen the nut just a tiny bit. Make sure there's no lateral or horizontal movement. Now it is time for the heat test of the hubs. Start spinning the motors using your controller for 5 minutes. If the hubs are heating up, loosen the axle nut just a tiny bit. If everything is fine, you can close the hub cap, just like in the previous instruction steps. Apply the provided gear drive grease in between the teeth of the gears. Make sure to cover all of the teeth gaps. The gear grease has a different color. Make sure you're not using the bearing grease. Place the gear drive cover on. Start tightening the cover bolts. There are 2 different lengths of the bolts. The longer bolts go onto the wheel gear side and the shorter bolts on the motor gear side. Lubricate the inside of the included V-ring with gear drive grease. Slide it onto the gear drive until it touches the gear drive casing. Do a spin test with the motors after applying the V-ring. Make sure everything spins freely and doesn't heat up. All you need to do now is just put on the wheels and go for a ride. Thank you for listening for all of these instructions, and happy riding!